the difference between CHEMI NUTRA with Braxton Ray.
So we're not exactly like most of your ingredient companies either. So I'll just go into a little bit of detail. Essentially, in the marketplace, a lot of people they'll buy ingredients from China and then they'll bring it into the US, rebrand it under a different trade name, do some clinical studies on it, and then resell it. But they're not fully integrated. We are essentially our parent company in Italy are experts in phospholipids, and basically everything that we sell is phospholipid based. So everything is produced in-house. We have vertical integration. We have complete oversight on what is going on. It's a really, really cool process. We do production in Italy and Brazil, but AlphaSize specifically is Italy only because it is a pretty sophisticated production method through ion transfer and exchange. And Italy is our better facility, I would say. They've been in operation longer as well. So essentially what we do is we pioneer new ingredients to the market. Phosphatidylserine, like our Serenade, our AlphaSize, our Alpha-GPC, and mediator phosphatidic acid. Those were the only one of their kind on the market when we introduced them. Mediator is still the only one actually as well, but there's been some knockoffs essentially of phosphatidylserine and Alpha-GPC. But we have always brought absolutely new novel ingredients to the market. And then what we do, since they are brand new, we always have to back with clinical research. And I'll go into some clinical research on Alpha-GPC in a few minutes. But essentially, we go through decades worth. The benefit of having a large Italian-based pharmaceutical company is that we actually use some of the same materials that they do for our end product. So Alpha-GPC is actually used as a pharmaceutical in the EU since 1980s, 1970s. So there's a ton of research there. Generally, their doses are pretty high in comparison because it is pharmaceutical and the cost isn't directly correlated to the end consumer. Insurance will cover part of that so they can kind of afford that as well. But we can ride on some of that research, but we as CHEMI NUTRA in the US support a ton of research. We've done dozens of studies for all of our ingredients. We have those on file for anyone, and a lot of the claims that Xendurance is using on their product is probably directly off of those as well, because we do some quality stuff. And then we support brands, like I just said, like Xendurance is using some of our studies to support their claims. That's what we try to do. We try to bring legitimate ingredients to the market that are actually going to benefit you guys. And then they're all produced under pharmaceutical grade production methods because they're actually produced in the same pharmaceutical plants that all the pharmaceuticals for our Italian companies that are distributed all over the world are in. And AlphaSize is kind of a unique one in there as well because that CHEMI and Italfarmaco, those are basically the co-parents of CHEMI NUTRA. Essentially, they use Alpha-GPC in pharmaceuticals over there, and they actually use it in intramuscular injection, so IM. And I mean, the quality control on that has to be absolutely top notch. And we use the exact same material, and they use it orally as well. But I mean, we use the same material, so the quality standard there is absolutely insane, which is always good, honestly, because I mean, safety is huge nowadays, and there's some questionable ingredients out there, and I'll touch on that as well. All right, so going into Alpha-GPC, very simply, honestly, it's called L-alpha-glycerol phosphorylcholine. Alpha-GPC is the main trade ingredient name that you'll see used on most labels because the other name is very long, honestly. So essentially what it is it's a choline donor. But it's unique in its own right because there's many choline donors out there. There's choline bitartrate, choline chloride, CDP choline, viticholine is like a branded ingredient. That's one of those. But essentially, there are some major differences between them. Choline chloride, choline bitartrate, they provide choline to basically the body from the neck down. And it's only so efficacious, I would say, because it can't really be incorporated because it is just a salt. It's just a free-floating choline once it's absorbed into the bloodstream. The difference of this between Alpha-GPC is the most bioavailable choline source for acetylcholine production in the body, and that is because it is basically lipid bound. It's bound to a glycerol backbone, which gives it the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. So what you're seeing on this slide is the makeup of choline in itself, or alpha-GPC in itself. The choline molecule being on the right side, it's bound to a phosphate, and then a glycerol backbone is on the left side. If you're not familiar with glycerol backbones, they're the same thing that are attached to triglycerides. It's a glycerol with 3 fatty acids attached to it. So what that kind of gets at is the absorption rates of lipids and fatty acids are very, very high. It takes basically no energy but from the body to absorb them. So basically alpha-GPC is riding off the same mechanism, and it gives it the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, which is significant because it replenishes acetylcholine. Acetylcholine's main place where it is going to be in the brain. It's involved heavily in neuron transmission, whether that's for like mental thought or physical benefits or physical power production. I'll go into that as well. But alpha-GPC, very simple, very unique, and it's been used in Europe and Asia for severe cognitive decline with significant positive results for honestly decades. Those are relatively high oral doses and then intramuscular injection as well. But it's a very, very cool ingredient and relatively new to the US still. The animation on the right. So alpha-GPC, what does it actually do? So when you take it orally, it is absorbed in the bloodstream very, very quickly. Really doesn't need any mediating transporters or anything like that, since it's kind of lipid bound. And its benefit, what it does is it's absorbed in the blood. It can cross the blood-brain barrier into the brain, or it can go into the peripheral nervous system, like muscle tissues, essentially. And it immediately increases the stores of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine being basically like the gas to drive your car, but for your brain and for your muscles, it has to essentially tell the muscles to contract. It's the main communication between neurons, essentially. So when you're a long day at work, etc., and you start to get like the brain fog idea, it could be easily acetylcholine breakdown, because essentially you can only use it so much before it starts to break down and then levels dissipate, making thought processes a little bit harder or more strenuous, just because you don't have that proper functioning, that proper firing. And then beyond the brain in itself, it has some significant benefit for muscle power production, muscle usage, muscle motor unit recruitment, a ton of different things. We have a ton of studies on them, so it's really cool, but it can go really in depth. But there's kind of a animation on the right side of this slide as well. You'll see like the red triangles coming out of the neuron are essentially acetylcholine. What it essentially needs to do is it's the signal for the muscle to contract. Very simply, it's the starting signal. And then once you run down on acetylcholine, you can only contract to a certain degree. I mean, it's kind of runs on the muscle motor unit recruitment idea. We're all stronger than what we're actually capable of recruiting. It's kind of like that when the parents get like superhuman strength to save their kids or something of the sort there. It's kind of the same idea. Like we have more muscle than we're actually able to recruit. So if you can recruit more, you can technically be stronger. It's kind of a learned trait as well. But it's very simple. It enhances cognitive ability, whether that's focus, recall, reaction times, whatever it may be. And then it just allows you to more effectively command muscle motor recruitment, and then improving basically anaerobic and aerobic performance in the end. So alpha-GPC, this is honestly a short list of the studies. These aren't even the studies. These are just kind of like their key points, because if we went through everything, we'd be here for a long time. So essentially these are all supported by our science. The main benefits would be improved cognitive function and delay cognitive decline. Delaying cognitive decline is connected to a lot of the studies that our parent company essentially has done over the decades for their intramuscular and their higher dosage for their pharmaceuticals in the EU. But the good thing about it is they generally address those after they've already happened. Alpha-GPC is kind of a compounding ingredient, so you don't have to take as high a dosage if you take it for longer, essentially. to get the same benefits. So once people already have cognitive decline, and then you have to take alpha GPC at a high dose to kind of reverse that or slow it. If you're taking it at a younger age and allowing it to build in your system, because it kind of increases acetylcholine for the long term as well, as long as you continue using it, then you're you're delaying cognitive decline in the future as well. So there's a compounding long-term effect if you are taking it before you actually have a significant cognitive decline. It improves memory, recall, and focus. Those are, honestly, I can't really go into much detail on those because they're relatively simple. You're just able to recall, and you're able to your brain is actually functioning at a better, essentially, because you have more of the main neurotransmitter that it's going to use for thought processes, and being able to store memories or recall memories is just neuron transmission, essentially, between the brain. And maintain and improve mental performance during and after stress or exercise. Essentially what this is getting at, so the study in itself is putting athletes or just individuals actually through an exhaustive exercise. We're to the point where they have that kind of like brain fog after really something hard. It could be acetylcholine depletion or just fatigue in general. But what they did is right after they did a placebo or acetylcholine dosing, and then they had them do tests. I think we've done it on a few different ones. So like reaction time and just basically tests that were timed where they had to go through relatively quickly. And you generally see, or you pretty much always see, an improved mental performance, improved reaction time. Basically what it is it's kind of negating that super exhausted feeling that you get after like a significant workout, which correlates well to that 2 to 3 hour slump that you get in your daily life. Like when you need coffee in the afternoon, essentially, it's kind of like the same idea. It's just easier to produce that when you put people through a stressful exercise instead of just having someone sit at a desk for 7 hours and then giving it to them. It'd be really hard to replicate. And it also replaces or improves the effects of caffeine. Really cool because it doesn't have any vasoconstriction abilities like caffeine does. So it doesn't decrease blood flow. It doesn't impact sleep negatively. So basically you can, if you're trying to get off caffeine, alpha GPC is a great thing to do, or a great thing to take, because it does have energy benefits, and they're very, very acute, relatively the same time frame of caffeine. Like we generally say, you'll see benefits or you'll see energy improvements in like 40 minutes. Honestly, in my opinion, personally, I think it's more like 20. That's just like anecdotal. That's how I feel when I take it. It's usually relatively quick. But it works very synergistically with caffeine, so it basically will increase the efficacy from a objective standpoint, and not necessarily proven by chemical mechanisms in the body, but we have tested this on an objective standpoint, and it's supported by the studies. And then there's no jitters, there's no crash, because I mean caffeine, you're blocking adenosine receptors, and then once the caffeine is away, you have an overload of adenosine that kind of comes rushing in. That's that crash. Alpha GPC is different because all it does is increase acetylcholine levels in the brain, and those slowly break down over time as they're utilized. So there's no up down. It's kind of like an up and like a very, very sustained, like slow down maybe, but you're talking like 13 hours. It's relatively active in the blood, so it's really, really long term, something that you honestly really wouldn't notice. So it's really cool like that. And then it has no negative effects on sleep like caffeine does. Like you can't, I mean, some people can take caffeine right before bed. I know I probably could. But it doesn't impact your sleep. It doesn't make it hard to fall asleep. It actually improves the quantity of REM sleep over the night. So it doesn't improve like the overall hours from the studies. Like everybody slept like 8 hours, but the percentage of REM sleep that they were actually in those 8 hours increased. So quantity of REM sleep within your sleeping time frame. Really cool because I use alpha GPC. I take it before my workout and then I take it before bed. It's completely counterintuitive. But at the same time, the best way for me to explain alpha GPC is it's going to allow you to do better at whatever you're setting your mind to do. If you want to sleep better, that's honestly weird. But if you want better sleep, it's going to help you with that by improving REM quantity of your sleep. And it also has some benefits for growth hormone production, so recovery, kind of like an anti-aging hormone as well. But it also allows you to get an energy boost when you want to from like a workout. So essentially, like the Focus product that we're speaking about is gonna really take on that focus, that energy boost, because it is paired with a little bit of caffeine and some other energizers as well. So it kind of takes on what is around it and the mentality that the person is trying to get into. It just really allows you to amplify the mentality that you want to be in. It also enhances dopamine production. I'll go into this a little further later, but dopamine is essentially a neurotransmitter in the brain as well that increases motivation. You'll see it a lot in like Focus and like nootropics nowadays. If you see a tyrosine or an N-acetyltyrosine or an L-Dopa or something like that, they're all increasing dopamine levels in the brain. Like that's their main benefit, main goal. It increases energy levels, motivation essentially. It's just a different neurotransmitter, but it works on a completely different scale. But alpha GPC increases dopamine and actually dopamine transporters, so it actually increases the efficacy of these other like precursors like tyrosine. And then simply it provides an acute energy boost. Studies say 40 minutes. I think it's sooner. I would definitely stand by that as well. It just really depends on how much food's in your stomach as well. But I mean, the energy boost is significant. It doesn't come on hard. There's no increase in heart rate. There's no vasoconstriction. It's kind of like caffeine, but not as like wiry at all. It's just much kind of smoother, like theanine, like they have in the Xendurance Focus as well. It's probably pretty similar to that, honestly. And so to move on to some of the physical benefits on the right side of this slide, we have a ton of studies on this. We've actually focused most of the CHEMI NUTRA research on the physical benefits. So increases power output. So anything jumping, weightlifting, cycling, anything that needs like power, aerobic, anaerobic, it's going to benefit both. It's going to delay fatigue in the long run for like aerobics because you have more of your neurotransmitter that's going to allow muscle contraction in the bloodstream and the muscle in the brain. So you're basically delaying when fatigue's really going to hit from that specific fatigue standpoint. It improves agility, reaction time is in there as well, like side jumps, whatnot. Improves fat oxidation and ketone production. Pretty cool there. There's probably a relationship between the growth hormone production as well, because that generally increases fat oxidation. But I mean, it's going to help essentially maintain a lower body fat mass in the end there. Delays fatigue, like I touched on that. Improve reaction time. Again, enhance overall physical ability essentially is what it comes down to. Your neuron transmission and your ability to contract muscle groups just is amplified essentially. And it's a long term. It's not like it only happens one time. It's not like caffeine either, where you essentially can get benefits for a week or two, and then the tolerance builds up, and then you have to double the dose, and then nothing happens after that, and then eventually you're taking a gram of caffeine, and yeah, it's a little bit beyond what you probably should be doing. But it just enhances what you're able to do. And then there's also a benefit for thyroid hormone conversion. So essentially it decreases TSH levels. Thyroid hormones are it's kind of a tricky mechanism or a tricky way to understand it. But essentially what that means is it's going to increase the T3, the hormone that is essentially bioactive, increasing metabolism for the most part. And that would relate well to the fat oxidation levels as well. There's probably a connection there as well. But just actually a lower TSH level is actually a sign of a healthier thyroid. That's generally one of the key things that you look at for hypothyroidism is a TSH level above, I think, 6. So lower better. So just to go in a little bit more detail on some of these studies, we have a ton. So these are just like two very, very short ones. Mental side, I mean, we write off a ton of the research from our Italian-based company, or Italian-based parents, since they've done decades of clinical cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's. We can't really utilize those claims, and definitely Xendurance or other brands can't either, just because it's not allowed in the U.S. because of what it is. But essentially, we've done studies at a ton of different universities. University of Central Florida, we've done a handful at. This one essentially is just looking at reaction time post-exercise. So I actually touched on this before, of maintaining mental alertness for the most part after exercise, exhaustive. So this is the one where they essentially put people through an exhaustive exercise. They're kind of like brain fog, brain dead a little bit afterwards, just those ones that really beat you down essentially. And then they gave them Alpha-GPC and a placebo. The supplemented group just maintained focus much better than the placebo following the exhaustion. Essentially, it's just your acetylcholine levels weren't depleted, and so their brain can actually function as it should afterwards. So improved reaction time. I'm sure focus and memory is in there as well, but that's not exactly what we're testing here. University of Eastern Kentucky, you have an acute duration here, which is essentially a single dose, just one dose, which is really cool about our Alpha-GPC, honestly, because it's not one of those ingredients that has to build up in your system to see a benefit. Like, you don't have to take it for like 7, 14, 2 months, like anything of a real time frame. Like, it's an acute. We have multiple studies that support one dose and you're seeing significant benefit, which is honestly wild in the herbal ingredient industry. It's just usually you have to take them for a time frame before you see any benefit, but we can show it in one time frame. So this one's acute. Basically, it's just supporting a better mood, and then increased in accuracy on reaction time tests. So essentially, this is going to be a test where they're timed. They're trying to answer questions as quickly as possible as well. I know this one, they did the reaction time, which is like light buttons. And then it also did basically a little test that was timed, and it's kind of like those times tables when you're in like 4th grade. It's like you never have enough time, so you're just rushing through it and seeing how many you can get right. Essentially the same idea. And just answer accuracy improved significantly with Alpha-GPC in comparison to placebo. We have a bunch of other studies going on right now, or about to come out as well. So we have one that's coming out of San Angelo State. It's basically video gameplay improvement for Alpha-GPC. That'll be pretty cool. That'll be interesting because that gamer community is large. And I mean, actually the Focus product that Xendurance is releasing would actually correlate well there. And then we also have a new study coming out for reaction time. I know they were doing testing like a few weeks ago, so that'll probably be a few months before it's actually ready to be released. Then to move on to the 2 studies for physical benefits. So this first one is probably like our flagship one. It's actually a really, really cool study out of University of Louisiana. Subjects took Alpha-GPC for 6 days, and then they saw a massive improvement in peak power output. Essentially, like they used isometric mid-thigh pull peak force, essentially the peak power output, anaerobic performance benefits there. The significance is it's a pretty cool study. It was really large. So this is kind of where the Alpha-GPC for physical started, and then we just go into a ton of different ones over the years. The next one is at Eastern Kentucky University. Essentially, you're seeing the same thing. Peak force production during they did a plyometric push-up was significantly greater. I mean, 12% with a acute dose, a single dose, one dose. You're seeing 12% benefit, which that p-value right there is a significance, like very significant, versus Alpha-GPC and placebo. So I mean, you're looking at a single dose and you're getting benefits, which is wild. And then it's a compounding ingredient as well. So as you take it longer, you get more benefit. And then there's a ton of different studies. The list continues and continues, and we keep building onto it. So I mean, if you guys want any of these studies, you can always ask the Xendurance people. It may be interesting. Our website doesn't have a ton of stuff on it, so we'd probably have to provide it through email either way, and they can get us in contact. To go into a little bit of the issues with Alpha-GPC. AlphaSize is a full-gras, very safe product supported by the FDA. All natural, plant-derived. We have studies supporting safety and efficacy back to the 1980s. Produced by CHEMI since 1991, has decades of usage in pharmaceuticals in the EU. Intramuscular injection, like you can't have any haywire ingredients or like side ingredients or contamination in there, because I mean you're bypassing all your body's defense mechanisms by just injecting directly into basically the bloodstream. So I mean the safety is insane, and we use the same thing for oral ingredient or the oral products that we provide as AlphaSize. So it's produced in an FDA inspected pharma facility in Italy. This is outside Rome. We just actually got the USP monograph kind of published, which is big. Not so much for the nutraceutical industry, but essentially USP is a pharmaceutical grade ingredient. Generally, you see like acetaminophen USP or one of those like pharmaceuticals will usually do USP because that's the designation that it needs. And our customers like Xendurance will be able to actually use this in their ingredient panel once we have this fully rolled out, which is happening this spring. So you have AlphaSize, Alpha-GPC, and then you have other Alpha-GPCs. There's a lot of question marks around these, honestly. A lot of them are produced synthetically in China. Not all ingredients from China are bad, but this is not one of the good ones. There's zero efficacy, there's zero safety studies. They use somewhere between 8 and 10 production methods, meaning there's relatively no standardization. They start with some questionable materials like glycidol, and then 3 MCPD and 2 MCPD. Basically, these ingredients are known like carcinogens in the US, but what they do is they use them as a starting ingredient, and then they go through a chemical reaction which basically will turn it into alpha-GPC in the end. The problem with not having a standardized production method is that you don't always get 100% conversion. So there's usually a little bit left of these like glycidol and other carcinogenic compounds left in the end product, which we've actually tested some. And generally, there's always a little bit in there, at least. I mean, it's a carcinogen, so how much do you actually want to take? Like, the dose is the poison, and the dose for the poison is probably pretty low in this case. Yeah, so it's questionable. There's some that have really high concentrations, and there's some that are relatively low, but anything is not acceptable, honestly, in the end. And AlphaSize can't actually have these in there because we come from a plant origin. The only reason that those other companies have it in there is because they use this as their main starting material. The ingredient is generally cheaper, so that's how it's kind of gotten into the US marketplace, but it literally has no safety studies, has no efficacy studies. They ride off of what we've done for the decades. It's just not really an acceptable ingredient in the end. We could probably talk all day on this, but it's interesting. So the criteria to be effective for utilizing alpha-GPC in a product, essentially. So you have to look at the product quality of the alpha-GPC. I mean, this is directly comparing to the last slide. So I'm looking at a synthetic GPC versus a AlphaSize. I mean, we're honestly, CHEMI, NUTRA, and AlphaSize are really the only legitimate players in alpha-GPC in the world. Basically, everybody else who produces is out of China, and it's kind of questionable. So essentially, you're looking at clinically proven to be effective and studies to support that. We have decades worth of it. The generic materials have technically none. So you're really looking at product quality there. And then the choline source, you'll see a lot of products that use like choline bitartrate, choline chloride. These are essentially choline salts. they absorb into the bloodstream. They give you a choline into the bloodstream, which benefits like the liver and some other small things, but it isn't highly effective or utilized within the body because it is just a choline salt. It can't cross the blood-brain barrier. It can't really be incorporated into the nervous system well. The body does do a little bit of conversion to alpha-GPC from these choline salts, but it's like 2%. So it's actually pretty insignificant. And if you take high doses of choline salts, there's actually some negative benefits, as in like you'll sweat like rotten egg smells. And there's some conversion to other like TMAO and some other issues that may actually arise as well with high doses there. So the really only way to get alpha-GPC into the bloodstream is to take alpha-GPC. The other choline salts just aren't effective. And then, I mean, alpha-GPC can cross the blood-brain barrier. It's been shown to be effective in the nervous systems. It's just that's really the only effective one when you compare it to any other choline salts. And there's plenty of studies that actually do compare alpha-GPC to all other choline sources, and there's always a significant difference between alpha-GPC and all the other choline sources. So it's unique in its own right. And then dosage is really going to be the last one and the main one. You have to clarify that you have a proper ingredient and that the quality is there, and then you have to actually give the proper dosage. So there are some companies out there who will do the pixie dust method where you might get like 2, 3, 4 milligrams. And it's really questionable, or some people will give you 20 milligrams and it seems a little bit better. But really what we see is once you hit 100 milligrams of active, then you're really getting to ride on those clinical benefit claims. And then the Xendurance product, it provides 150 milligrams of active, very, very solid. And then with the compounding effects of alpha-GPC, you're going to see improved benefits over the time frame that you're taking this. So you don't need huge doses up front. You just need consistent dosing. With any herbal ingredient, that's really what you need is consistency, and that's where you see the benefits. Anything under 50 milligrams of active is not even going to be really significant. And then you have the pixie dust, which obviously is not significant. But this dosage of anything over 100 is really going to be supported by all of our research. And then the compounding effect, you'll see benefits over the time frames as it builds up. So the product in a whole, Xendurance Focus, there's a handful of ingredients in there. Some of the most synergistic ones is the ones I'll touch on. Alpha-GPC, caffeine, theanine are going to be really, really cool together. The caffeine dose is relatively conservative, which is always nice because you don't have as much vasoconstriction or just wiredness. So you're inhibiting adenosine receptors there. Alpha-GPC is increasing acetylcholine levels, which is a complementary but completely independent system for energy levels. And then you have theanine, which influences brain waves, essentially for a calmness energy level. So it should work very, very synergistically there. It'll be kind of cool to see. And with the lower caffeine levels and the beetroot powder in there as well, you're not getting that massive vasoconstriction from like 300-400 milligrams of caffeine. And then you also get the nitrates from beetroot powder, which is essentially going to vasodilate the blood vessels, improve oxygen flow to the brain, blood flow to the brain as well. It'll be really good. It'll be very steady. I don't think you'll see much of an up and down at all. It'll probably be very steady for at least 3-4 hours. It should be interesting. Alpha-GPC and then tyrosine. I touched on this earlier with the dopamine production and dopamine transporter increases as well. Tyrosine is a precursor to dopamine. Dopamine is that neurotransmitter that essentially is for motivation. It improves energy levels as well throughout the day. But alpha-GPC will actually improve the dopamine levels beyond what tyrosine could do on its own. And then it also increases transport proteins, which essentially in the end will allow tyrosine to work better in the brain, or once it's actually converted over to dopamine, it will allow it to work better due to transports. I mean, honestly, that's the most synergy that I can come up with. It's all true to fact. Alpha-GPC and caffeine have been shown multiple times to have benefits with a synergy there as well. It'll be a really cool product for them, and I think it'll do well. Very steady, very sustained, and then you get the long-term benefits of theanine, alpha-GPC, and the non-caffeine benefits of tyrosine and some of these other vitamin ingredients as well.